On a cold morning, when the church bells still lingered in the air like the heartbeat of a tired soul, Paul Carther stopped on the stone steps and drew a deep breath. Millionaire, board chairman, a man whose agenda overflowed into weeks that never seemed long enough. And yet he was empty. Behind the flawless suit lived someone searching for a reason that numbers could not explain. That was when he saw her, a little girl in a white dress, rainbow-striped socks flashing like tiny flags of joy, holding the world in her small fingers. She looked at him, first cautious, then hopeful. "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy today?" The question cut through the bells, the plaza, and straight into Paul's chest. At the church doors, under stained glass that painted the light in colors of redemption, a simple request prepared the ground for a profound answer. Sometimes, God whispers where we least expect, in the voice of a child asking for someone to simply show up. If you love emotional and heartwarming stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, so you'll always be the first to hear our next story. Now let's begin. The facade of St. Helena's Church seemed older than the city itself. Weathered stone held the weight of countless stories, promises made and broken, weddings filled with laughter, funerals heavy with silence. Paul Carther climbed 2 steps and rested his hand on the iron railing. The cold metal grounded him in the present, something his life, ironically, rarely allowed. He was always projected forward. The next quarter, the next acquisition, the next record. The past was a locked room, the present a narrow corridor. The church doors stood open. Inside lingered the low murmur of whispered prayers, the scent of melting wax, and the musty perfume of aged wood. Paul stepped in, removed his glasses for a moment, and let the stained glass colors wash over his face. Crimson and sapphire fractured across his tie, sketching a new coat of arms. He slid into the last pew. The silence didn't suffocate him, it pressed on him, demanding that he notice the parts of himself he had ignored for years. "Why don't I feel anything?" The thought startled him. An elderly woman lit a candle, crossed herself, and smiled faintly as she left. Paul returned the gesture with a nod. When the bells struck 9, he rose, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the door. The sunlight on the stone steps was blinding. And then he saw her. A little girl, Emily, no more than 4 years old, with golden curls that caught fire in the morning light. A white dress with delicate lace, and socks, rainbow-striped, bold as flags of resilience. She clutched the hem of her dress, summoning courage. "Sir," her voice was almost a breath. Paul leaned down instinctively, aligning himself with her small gaze. "Yes. Could you pretend to be my daddy today?" The words, so fragile, reverberated inside him. They collided with old memories, a boy at a window, waiting for someone who never came. Paul pressed his lips together. Emily's eyes carried both hope and caution, the look of a child already too familiar with disappointment. "What's your name?" His voice softened, careful, as if stepping onto glass. "Emily. Emily Rose Patterson." "That's a beautiful name, Emily." "I'm Paul." "Hi, Paul." "Hello." He smiled gently. "Why do you need a daddy today?" She raised her chin, defensive and brave. "At my school, we have Daddy Day. They read stories and play games. Today is the day. But my daddy lives far away, with his new family. Mommy says he's too busy." The last words fell flat, rehearsed, repeated, so often they lost meaning. "Where's your mommy now?" "There." She pointed to a parish hall, beside the church with a wooden sign, "Community Help Project." "She's talking to a nice lady about a job. She told me I could play in the sunshine, but not to talk to strangers." "And I'm a stranger." Paul's smile reached his eyes. "That's why we need to ask your mom first, right?" Emily nodded, relieved that he knew the rule. He extended his hand. She hesitated, glanced at his face, then chose to trust. Her tiny hand slid into his. It was a simple contact, yet it carried weight. Paul felt something shift, like a lock giving way inside him. Together, they walked down the steps. The parish hall smelled of coffee and detergent. In the back, among racks of donated clothes, a young woman, Margaret, was filling out a form. Her hair was tied hastily, her eyes tired but sharp. She turned at her daughter's voice. "Mommy, this is Paul. He's going to be my daddy today." Margaret froze. Alarm, disbelief, then embarrassment swept across her face. Her gaze landed on Paul, studying him, his suit, his careful demeanor, the respectful distance he kept. She began, unsure whether to scold Emily or apologize to the stranger. Paul stepped forward calmly. "Margaret, I'm Paul Carther. Emily approached me outside. She explained about the school event. I wanted to make sure you're comfortable before anything happens. If you're not, I completely understand." The parish worker, sensing tension, tactfully stepped away. Margaret's lips pressed together. It wasn't just about safety, though that was reason enough. It was about dignity, the thin line between accepting help and appearing incapable. "And why would you do this?" she asked finally. Paul glanced down at Emily, then back at her mother. "Because I remember what it's like to wait for someone who never shows up. And because if I can be here even just for a day, maybe that counts for something." Margaret studied him. Emily's hand tugged at her sleeve. A decision formed, heavy but necessary. "I'll come with you. At least until school. I'll talk to her teacher. If it's safe," she looked at her daughter. "Then you can have your daddy day." Emily lit up like sunrise. Paul felt something rearrange inside him, like a drawer sealed for decades had finally been opened. The drive was quiet. Margaret's old pickup rattled slightly, a crucifix swaying from the rearview mirror. Between pauses, she revealed essentials. Emily's father had left when she was 2. Margaret worked as a cleaner, now seeking steadier hours. The school was public, but Daddy Day had become a cherished tradition, one that could sting for children like Emily. "Do you have kids?" Margaret asked. Paul hesitated. "No," he exhaled. "I always had excuses not to." She nodded, not judging. The radio hummed with a hymn. Emily broke the heaviness with sudden cheer. "Paul, you have a daddy voice?" He smiled. "Yes. Like thunder, but soft thunder." At the school, paper chains and drawings hung from the walls. The teacher, Miss Carla, welcomed them with a professional warmth. Margaret explained quickly. Protocols were followed, calls made, approval given. "Welcome to Daddy Day," the teacher said. Paul knelt in a circle of tiny chairs, a foreign battlefield. Emily handed him the very hungry caterpillar. He cleared his throat and dropped his voice into theatrical depths. In the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. The children giggled at his exaggerations, clapped when the caterpillar ate through apples and pears, gasped at the cocoon. Emily rested her head on his arm, glowing. At the door, Margaret bit her lip, holding back a tear that wasn't sadness, but something gentler. Relief. After the reading came games, crafts, messy glue projects. Paul was pinned with a handmade paper badge, Best Daddy, for a day. It stuck crooked on his jacket, more valuable than any medal he had ever received. At recess, Miss Carla leaned close. "Some children hate this day. It can be cruel." Today, Emily was whole. Paul swallowed hard. "Thank you for letting me be here." "No," she said softly. "Thank you for showing up." Later, there was chocolate cake and orange juice. Photos were taken. Margaret gave cautious consent for Emily's picture with Paul. The snapshot captured an unlikely scene. A millionaire with a crooked paper badge, a little girl hugging his waist, rainbow socks dangling. On the way out, Emily held the photo. "You're my daddy today." Paul tucked the picture carefully into his briefcase. For once, it carried something that mattered. They stopped at a cafe near the church. Margaret needed to measure the reality of this day. Coffee came with foam hearts, Emily's drink only milk with cinnamon. "Thank you," Margaret said quietly. "Not just for today. For reminding me we're not alone." Paul stirred his cup slowly. "I came to the church this morning," he confessed. "I have everything I planned for, but no meaning. It slips away." Margaret smiled faintly. "Meaning isn't waiting like a parking spot. We build it with what we do for others." "You sound like a preacher." "I sound like someone who has to believe tomorrow is worth waking up for." Emily broke the gravity, giggling with foam on her nose. "Paul, you make funny voices." Yes, he grinned. Voices go where the heart can't reach alone. They laughed, and laughter cracked old ice. On the way back, Emily stopped to show him a wild daisy blooming between the church gate's iron bars. See, Paul? It grew in a tight place, and it's still pretty. He studied the flower and understood. Beauty doesn't always grow in good soil. Sometimes it blooms in cracks. Paul glanced at Margaret. May I help in some practical way? I don't want to intrude. She hesitated, then admitted, Emily's school is starting music lessons. They need flutes. I can't afford it. You didn't ask, he said gently. You told me. If you'll allow, I'd like to cover it. Arrangements were made. Discreetly. Respectfully. By late afternoon, sunlight stretched long shadows on the church steps. Emily squeezed his hand. Thank you for being my daddy today. He crouched eye level. Thank you for reminding me to show up. Margaret's gaze softened. Paul added quietly, if you're comfortable, I'd like to keep visiting. Not to replace, but to be here. Margaret thought long, measured the risks, then nodded. Rules. Boundaries. But yes. Emily clapped, not fully understanding, but fully happy. Paul entered the church one last time before leaving. He didn't bargain with God. He simply whispered, I don't know where to start. But today, I felt something. Show me the next step. Just the next. The candlelight flickered. The same old woman passed him again and murmured, sometimes, the first miracle is a heart unarmed. Paul smiled. His chest felt lighter. Days passed. Margaret got steady hours at the parish thrift shop, then an extra shift at a laundry. Emily began music classes, blowing clumsy notes on her flute, summoning joy as if it were magic. Paul carved out sacred time. Wednesdays from 4 to 6 were Emily's. Not extravagant outings, just parks, stories, drawings. Sometimes Margaret joined with homemade cake. They all learned how to live in the space between. Paul wasn't replacing. He was adding. At work, changes emerged quietly but unmistakably. He delegated, declined acquisitions that didn't feel right, created a scholarship fund for employees' children. At a lunch meeting, a colleague observed, "You seem different." Paul smiled. "I'm present." The colleague chuckled, missing the point. Paul didn't explain. Some answers are only for those who've lived the question. One rainy afternoon, he arrived early at the church, sat on the steps. The bells tolled softly. The old woman passed again. "Sometimes the miracle is showing up before you're asked," he said. "And staying after," she replied. When Margaret and Emily arrived, the girl handed him a rolled-up drawing. 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. Names scribbled above, Margaret, Emily, Paul. 3 hearts and a sun below. "It's us," she said. "It's us," he echoed, storing it like a treasure. That night, Paul placed the drawing beside the photo of Daddy Day. For the first time, his silence at home wasn't hollow. It was inhabited. Weeks later, they celebrated Margaret's new job shift with ice cream. Emily chose pink, so bright it seemed invented. Paul took chocolate. Margaret toasted coconut. Emily played 3 shaky notes on her flute. "What's that song?" Paul asked. "It's the music of showing up," she said with perfect seriousness. They laughed until the car reached home. At the door, Emily opened her small hand, the same gesture that had started it all. Paul took it. "Thanks for being my daddy today," she whispered. He smiled, no hesitation now. "Thank you for reminding me how." The door closed gently. Paul walked back to his car, carrying a piece handcrafted, moment by moment. On the steps of the church, months earlier, he had been searching for meaning. Now he finally understood. Meaning isn't something you buy or calculate. It's the steps you take toward another person. And sometimes it begins with the simplest prayer of all, a prayer made by the heart. Which part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you won't miss any of our next emotional stories.